I'm speaking with Steve Kerr, the eight-time NBA champion. He won five titles as a player, three with the Chicago Bulls and San Antonio Spurs, as well as three with the Golden State Warriors as the head coach. Steve, thank you so much for joining us here at the Arab News newspaper.
Thanks for having me, Ray.
One of the things that, as was telling you beforehand, is that I never made the connection between your success, you being a role model in athletics, and the enormous influence that your father had on many Arab Americans and on the Middle East itself. Malcolm Kerr was the president of the American University of Beirut. I had two of my relatives that were teachers back in the 70s and 80s and probably knew your father. Never made that connection. And when I heard that you were his son, and I spoke to the Arab News, it was, like something like a discovery that was like finding gold. So we're really honored to be able to spend some time to talk with you. I guess the one thing, tell us a little bit about, you were born in the Middle East, right? In Beirut?
I was born in Beirut because my dad was teaching, actually a graduate student at the American University in Beirut, and when he met my mother, who was on her junior year abroad. She took a semester and went to Beirut from Occidental College in Los Angeles. So that's how they met, and so my older siblings, my sister and brother were both born in Beirut at the American University Hospital, as was I.
Wow.
And then my dad took the job at UCLA, where he was a professor for the next 20 years or so. And so our youngest brother, there were four of us total, he was born in Santa Monica. But yeah, I was born in Beirut at the hospital, same hospital my dad was born at on campus at AUB.
That's amazing. Now, is your mother Middle Eastern by any chance, or was she just a student at the American University?
No, just she was a student. She grew up in Santa Monica in the Los Angeles area, and went to Occidental and decided she wanted to travel abroad for her junior year. And when she told her parents that she wanted to go to Beirut, they thought she was nuts. She was thinking, London or someplace much more,
that is
sort of understood by Americans, And so, but my mom had a real sense of adventure and went to Beirut and met my dad there, and we've had this long family history that goes way back. So my mom is still to this day at 85 years old. Still enamored with Beirut and the Middle East, and just has a special place in her heart for the whole region.
So you were born there. You spent some time there. Did you grow up there, or was it more like visits there, or just while your dad was at the university? Tell us a little bit about your living in the Middle East, if you did.
Yeah, so I left Beirut. I was only less than 2 years old, I think. So we went to Los Angeles when my dad took the job at UCLA. But we traveled periodically to the Middle East because he took sabbaticals from his job at UCLA to do research. And so we spent 3 years in Cairo, at the American University in Cairo. Well, my dad was at AUC, and my siblings and I went to school in Cairo. So I was 10, and then again for a second trip at 14 and 15.
Wow.
And so I spoke Arabic pretty well.
I was just going to ask, maybe we could do this interview in Arabic.
I'm afraid not. I've lost most of it.
Me too, don't worry.
Yeah, all right.
But I
have great memories of living in Cairo and traveling back to Beirut and throughout the Middle East. And I've got a lot of great memories from my childhood of being able to travel across the whole region.
Now, I know obviously it's a little sad story because your father, again, he was such an influence on so many people. he did some great writing. His books are, a pillar in our community in understanding the Middle East. And obviously his life was taken, and you were kind of young. I think you were in your 20s at the time when he died. Is that correct?
I was actually 18. He died in January of 1984.
Wow.
I was a freshman at the University of Arizona, and he had taken the president job at American University in Beirut, and so he'd been president for a couple of years. And my mom and younger brother Andrew were living with him there on campus, and yeah, he was killed outside of his office, coming out of an elevator. He was shot by a gunman. Act of terrorism, and obviously just devastated our family. And we've forged ahead, and everybody in our family has done well. I give my mom amazing credit for just how strong she has been, and continuing to live her life in a really productive and positive manner. But yeah, it's we all miss our dad every day.
I bet you do, and I'm very sorry about that. I know my father passed away when I was 16, so he never got to see what I did, and I wonder if that which is something I always think about. I wonder how my dad would look at me as a journalist and having done all this, although all the rest of my relatives are doctors and professors at American University. I'm the only journalist, so I'm not sure he'd be as happy. But did your dad understand your love for basketball? Did it start early, or was that something that came later for you?
It started early, and it was actually sort of the perfect combination of forces that came together for me in my young life, because my dad was at UCLA at the same time that John Wooden coached at UCLA and was winning national championships.
Wow.
And so my first experience with basketball was watching UCLA at Pauley Pavilion. My dad had a couple of season tickets, being a professor there, and I'll never forget walking into Pauley Pavilion when I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and the place was sold out, and Bill Walton is on the floor for UCLA, and they haven't lost in about 3 years, and the place was just going crazy. The band is playing, and I remember just falling in love with the sport through UCLA. So it actually, I couldn't have been in a better situation as a kid to be right there in John Wooden's backyard and to watch those teams and to learn about basketball during one of the greatest eras in American sports.
Did your dad ever talk to you about basketball and say, yes, this is going to be fun for you, but I want you to be a doctor, I want you to be a professor? I know that's what my dad did for me, not expecting me to go into journalism, but was there any of that? I mean, while you were growing up, and did he want you to be? Is that what he wanted you to be, or did he have anything that he had?
My dad and my mom were both very much sort of neutral on what I was going to do. I mean, they just let me develop my own interests. They made sure I was going to school and studying hard, and I was a decent student, not a great student, but because I was much more interested in sports than I was in academics. But growing up in an academic family in that environment, there was definitely some guidance and direction as far as what I needed to do, and but there was never any thought about what career path I would take. They let me figure that out for myself.
And what was it like with your dad, if you don't mind me asking? I mean, did you understand his? Of course, you were young, but not that young. But did you understand his interest in the Middle East? Did you ever get into that yourself?
Yeah. So I have this memory of him in his office every day. Typing away. He would come home from campus, from UCLA, and he'd be in his office, and he'd make a bowl of popcorn, and he'd be on his typewriter, before the days of the computer, and he'd have the white out, and he'd be typing away, and he'd have classical music going in the background, and so it's a wonderful memory of him and his intense, deep interest in the Middle East and concern for the area and politics in the area, and then of course, at the dinner table we heard all kinds of talk that centered around the Middle East. So my siblings and I grew up with it, and we were well aware of my dad's interest and his impact on the region.
Did you ever get to meet any of the Arab leaders in the Middle East? Your dad was pretty influential. Any memories?
He was, and we had a lot of barbecues at our house where people would come over. People from all over the world would end up at our house, and realized how special it was until later on. But it was it felt like the United Nations, just people from all over the world coming over and sharing a meal on a Sunday afternoon, literally 20, 25 people in our backyard. And,
wow.
And so that was the atmosphere that I grew up in. And my parents would watch the evening news every night with intense interest, especially when the subject turned to the Middle East. I remember my dad celebrating when Sadat and signed a peace pact at Camp David, and it seemed like the biggest moment in my dad's life when that happened. And so I have a lot of memories of a lot of different events. Of course, it was only a few years later that Sadat was killed in Cairo. And as always the case, one step forward, two steps back, and we just could never to be tracked to really create peace. And it was great to have my dad to explain what was happening to us, because it's one thing to read about something, to really get from your own father about what was happening. Yeah, we had guests over all the time from all over the world. I remember my parents would have barbecues in the backyard, and it felt like a United Nation. You'd have all these visiting professors and people from different backgrounds, different nationalities, and then just around our dinner table, the conversation would always include what was happening in world politics, in particular in the Middle East. And I think one of the happiest days of my dad's life was when the Camp David Accord came to fruition, and Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat and Jimmy Carter reached the peace agreement, and there was that famous photo of Begin and Sadat shaking hands, which no one ever thought would happen.
Right.
And so I remember all these moments during my childhood and as I grew up, and it was amazing to have my dad there to explain what was happening, because it's one thing to read the newspaper, but another thing to have somebody in your own family explaining the details of what's going on.
Your dad was actually an influencer in the Middle East, and his books had a great influence on a lot of people. So his interest had to be phenomenal. I'm surprised you didn't become a professor of Middle East politics, given your dad's influence. Do you ever wonder what might have happened had he lived? What type of influence he might have had on you? I'm sure he would have been enormously proud of how well you've done as an athlete, and also in your profession of basketball. But do you ever think about that and what might have happened to you with your life?
Yeah, I think about it all the time. I'm sure you do too. When you lose parent at an early age, you think about everything, how much my dad would have enjoyed watching me play basketball professionally, because it was nothing that we ever even dreamt of. It was too far of an extreme to even think that might happen. So, and my dad loved basketball. He loved watching me play. We used to play in the driveway together with my older brother, John.
Really? Wow.
And, and we'd watch UCLA games together and cheer for UCLA. And it was an amazing childhood. And so I think all the time about, how nice it would have been for us to share my career together, and then my family, for him to be a grandfather, for my kids and my wife to have known him, and so those are all things that you lament. The loss is so deep and so profound, and it affects you in so many ways, and you think about all that stuff. When you lose someone at that age.
Yeah, and I could only imagine my dad watching me cover City Hall, and and I'm sure you've imagined your father, if he would have seen you playing with the Bulls. That was probably one of the high points. Although the Golden State Warriors are a great team, okay, Steve? I just want you to know that. Being from Chicago, I love the Bulls, but the fact that they have you means that there's a tie to Chicago with the Golden State Warriors. Did you ever think about having that entree to the Middle East, understanding maybe a little bit better than most people? Do you ever think about doing something in the Middle East with basketball or sports? I know everybody loves soccer in the Middle East. They call it football. But we've seen some changes over the last few years, especially in Saudi Arabia, where they're expanding their sports there. Can you imagine, like, the NBA someday expanding to include the Middle East?
Yeah, that's a long ways off. But the game has gotten so popular globally, and I played in Cairo when I was in high school, and I was there for my freshman and sophomore years, and played for the Cairo American College Eagles, and we played against all the Egyptian local teams, and then at the end of each season we'd go to Athens to play against the other American schools in the Mediterranean region. It was an amazing experience to be able to do that at the age of 14, 15 years old. But I remember playing outdoors. We didn't have a gym at the school. They ended up building one a few years after I left. But we played all of our games outdoors. The club games against, on the road in Cairo, really played on clay, like a clay tennis court, but with hoops at each end, and sometimes at night, under a string of light bulbs, and I mean, you can't make it up,
And basketball is such an American sport too, to see it kind of evolve in the Middle East. That has to be fascinating to see the differences, how they look at it. It's not soccer.
Yeah, no, it's not soccer, and I remember playing soccer also, against the Egyptian kids at our school, and they were running circles around the American kids, because that was what they grew up with, and so we grew up with basketball, and so we had the advantage in basketball, so it was fun just to play sports and people and build bridges. I think all of that experience has shaped my world, and has definitely led me to be outspoken about political issues. So I think my whole life and my childhood learning from my parents has sort of prepared me to become a coach and to become a public figure, and so I was very fortunate.
I was just going to ask you about the ESPN series that just came out. Did you get a chance to watch it, The Last Dance at all? And because it included you, Michael. I mean, you played with Michael Jordan. You and others are great basketball players. Did you get a chance to see the ESPN series?
Oh yeah. I watched the whole thing. They did a great job with it. I mean, it was 22 years ago that that season occurred, so it's been a long time, and I hadn't seen most of that footage. So it was fun to watch with my kids and my wife, and it's a good reminder of what our life was like back then, and what an incredibly special team that was, and era that was to be a part of. So a lot of fun, and just the experience of playing on that team and playing in Chicago, and being a part of a team that was so historic, pretty amazing. When I really stop and think about it, just to have been a part of that is incredible.
I remember the parades and the celebrations we had in Chicago when you guys were there, and I think I still have the front pages. They're laminated in plastic. It was such a big deal. I had an office right down the street from where all the celebrations were, so that had to be memorable. Was there anything that stands out in your mind about being with the Bulls at that time that probably no other time in history it had to be just phenomenal to be part of that movement back then?
Yeah, I mean, I think what stands out is just how special it was, because Michael Jordan to me is sort of the Babe Ruth of basketball. When I was growing up, basically in the 70s, when you'd read about sports, you'd hear a handful of names, and Babe Ruth was probably the most prominent one. And I think today, for today's generation, Michael Jordan is the new Babe Ruth, the greatest of all time. And the difference, of course, is that we never, other than a few grainy images of seeing Babe Ruth hit a home run, we really didn't get much of a look at him. Whereas with Jordan, we just saw 10 hours of footage from The Last Dance, and we have a whole archive of his games, and so we really have an idea of who he was and how he played. And so to just be a part of history and to be on a team like that is pretty special.
Well, if Michael Jordan is the Babe Ruth of basketball, you are the Roger Maris of basketball. Okay, Roger Maris was a phenomenal player too. If you had to pick a moment in your career as a player where you said, "Wow, this is like the best moment," I'm sure you've had many great moments, but is there one that stands out at all as a basketball player that you really say, "Wow, that had to be the greatest moment of my life"?
If there was one moment in my career, it was hitting a shot in '97 for the Bulls in the finals, and that was an incredible moment. And people ask me about that to this day. But my favorite game was actually one of the final games of my career. I was 37 years old. I was with the Spurs, and I had hardly played, and I was over the hill. And but I was really hoping to have one final moment, and our point guard Tony Parker was sick, and Coach Popovich, who's become one of my best friends and a mentor, he threw me out there in the fourth quarter, and I made 4 threes. It was almost an out-of-body experience. Wow. And it was such a great way to retire. We won the game, we advanced to the finals, and I had this moment that I felt like I had worked my whole life, for a moment like that. And a feeling like that. It was sort of like I said, just a Zen moment where there was nothing in my way and everything was going in. I had no idea how it had happened, but to end my career with a game like that, and we went on and won the championship, and I retired a couple of weeks after that game. That was a hell of a way to go out, and so that's probably my favorite game I've ever played.
That's phenomenal to hear that. Any other thoughts or final thoughts that you want to bring out or mention about your father that maybe I didn't talk about, or your career in basketball that you
Well,
think people should?
yeah, I mean, I just think that my dad was a very humble person. He was a brilliant man. He was brilliant in his knowledge of his field, but also his social awareness, his emotional intelligence. He had a lot of patience, and I think he understood. He really understood how to have conversations with people from every background, every different point of view. And he really, I learned from that. I learned how important it is to be humble and to listen. And I think about that a lot because our country has a lot of problems. In many ways, we're a great country, and in many ways, we have huge problems. And we really have to solve some of our issues. And the only way to do it is through awareness and education and communication and humility and humanity. And those are all ideals that my dad stood for. And so I'm very proud of him for that and the work that he did. And I try to carry on that legacy with the way I carry myself as a coach. But I wish he were here to help me kind of sift through, the latest in politics and what's happening all the time, because it's a much like the rest of the world. It's a complicated, tangled mess to unwind, and he would have been able to do it. Unlike most people, it's all really confusing.
Steve, listen, it really is a pleasure to talk to you. It was very kind of you to, take the time to talk to us. It's a real honor, especially, again, for me, just being from Chicago, seeing you at the Bulls. And, again, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thanks, Ray.
All right, I appreciate it. Good luck to you. Thank you, buddy.